my name is Irene. I'd like to welcome you to my channel. I talk about my opinions on books and hopefully I can give you a few good recommendations. Before I get started, I would just like to ask you to please like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Alright, so today I'm going to be talking about my most disappointing books. So I had to really narrow down this list. I could honestly make two parts of this video because I read a lot of books. I kind of have a lot of books that really disappointed me. So the ones that I picked for this one are at the top of that list. So I'm just gonna get started. I have about 10 here that I want to talk about, and I think why some of these disappointed me the most was because they were sequels or overhyped them up right. So let's just get started. First off, I want to talk about A Court of Mist and Fury. So the reason this disappointed me is because I absolutely loved the first book in the series, A Court of Thorns and Roses. It was really good. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, basically, and there's this girl who lives on this side of the world. So there's two sides of the world. One's for the fairies and then one with the regular humans. And there's one girl that lives on one side and she gets captured and by this fairy and taken to the other side of the world, and she has to live in this really nice mansion, and she's, taken care of by these fairies, and then it becomes kind of a romance, but then it turns into a twist, and all these crazy things happen in. There's so much world building in this series, so many unique aspects. It's a very loose retelling of Beauty and the Beast. You can only see it in some of the areas, and I loved the first one. The second one did everything I wanted to do. It followed the characters I wanted to follow. The romantic part of the story turned exactly how I wanted to do. We got to explore the part of the world I wanted to, but there was something about it that disconnected me from it. I think that it was the adding of all these characters, ones that I didn't really care about, and I didn't really care to see their side of the story. I wasn't interested in them, and we just focused too much on that. And I think that was why I didn't like it. And the plot of the the last two books wasn't grasping my attention. So that is why I was really disappointed by this. I think that the first book was 5 stars and the last two were 3 stars, and it was so sad because it could have done great things, but it didn't for me. The next one I'm going to talk about is Shadow and Bone, which is the first book in the Grisha trilogy, and I wanted to love this series. So before I read this book, I only read urban fantasy. So I really wanted to love this. I really wanted this to be the book that hooked me onto fantasy and YA fantasy, but it didn't. And I think after this I realized that I really connect more with adult fantasy. Although it doesn't always work. I think it all depends on the story, and I don't even remember exactly what the Grisha series was about, because it wasn't anything special to me. I wasn't interested in the plot, I wasn't interested in the characters, so I just didn't like it. Then there is Legendary. So this is the second book in the Caraval series. This is just like A Court of Mist and Fury. I love the first book, Caraval, which was about this carnival, not really a carnival, it's more like a game that the main character got wrapped up in, and it was kind of like a love story, and it was her trying to win this game because her sister gets taken away from her. Anyway, I love the first book, and the second book I didn't care as much. I didn't care where the plot went. I wasn't interested in it in that way. I think that it did something interesting by focusing more on like cards, which, kind of relate to like tarot cards. I thought that was interesting, but I didn't love it. I didn't connect with it as much, and the first book was amazing for me, and I don't understand why that happens to me so much in series where I love the first book, I absolutely adore, and the rest of the series just kind of sucks for me. And you'll see the common theme throughout most of these books. Next book I have here is Withering Heights. So the reason I was disappointed in this book is because I read Jane Eyre before that, which is by a different Bronte sister, and I watched the movie Withering Heights before I read this one, and it was about this kind of romantic relationship between these two young kids and kind of watching them grow up together, and then it gets really dark. Like, it gets really dark for that time, and yeah, this is a classic, but the problem with this book, and the reason I was so disappointed by it, I think it would have been great if it didn't do this, but it followed the servant's perspective. So it wasn't even following the story. It was just following the servant telling the story. It was the servant telling the story to this random man. This is what that book was. And I wanted to follow the story. I didn't want to follow a servant telling the story. I wanted to follow the story. Like, it took me so out of it, and I felt like disconnected from it because I wasn't even watching these characters. So I was really disappointed by this. I really wanted to love it, and it has such a good idea, and I feel like I would love it if it just didn't do that, but it did, so it's extremely disappointing for me. Next book I have here is Clash of Kings. So the reason this one was disappointing for me is because the first book, Game of Thrones, I loved. Like, that book didn't disappoint me at all. It was everything I wanted and more. It was perfect. It was perfect. Game of Thrones is one of my favorite books of all time. And this book let me down. This book felt so slow, and it kept dragging on, and it was following parts of the plot that I didn't care about as much, because I feel like the reason I love the story is because of the characters, and I just didn't get that as much out of this one. I think it was following more of the plot, and it just dragged on, and it followed a part that I didn't really care about. So unfortunately, I was really disappointed by it because I was really thinking Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire series would be one of my favorites, and it's not. You know, the first book is one of my favorite books of all time, but the rest of the series I didn't love as much. So that's what really sucks. It was really disappointing for me because I realized after I read this book that is probably where the series was going to go, was probably going to be around 3 or 4 stars. This is probably really like controversial, me saying this, but that's just my opinion. I just want to share it. I'm starting to realize how controversial this video is because so many of these books are so popular, and I was disappointed by so many of them. I feel so bad. Okay, but another one, second book in a little time. Same thing with Game of Thrones. I loved the first one. I was like, this is going to be one of my favorite series of all time because the first book was fantastic. And then in this one, the plot changed. The plot was less exploring of the world. I don't know if that's true. That might not be true. But the plot didn't do it in the way the first one did. Because the first one was following this group of people across this world and trying to figure out why there was Trollocs attacking their town. You know, this is a high fantasy series, and we were discovering the world and what was happening in the world, and that was fantastic, and I loved it. And then this one, it started following a part of the plot that I just didn't care about as much, and I think that part of the problem is as there's more books in this series, there's way more characters, way more characters, too many characters. The first one followed, like, I would say 10 at the most. You know, there was a bunch along the way, but like there was like the 10 main ones. And then as it went on, I was like, okay, they added way too many in this one, and then they add more and more and more, and they add more layers and stuff to the world, which is great. The show is showing how big the world is, but then it just like makes the plot kind of dragging, and I don't even know what's happening at some points because I'm like, who are these people and why are they so important? And it just doesn't make any sense. So I was really disappointed by this because I was hoping that the whole series would be like the first one, where it's just like an adventure after adventure and just trying to discover the world and just trying to, you know, but it wasn't. So unfortunately, this was a bit disappointing for me. Next book, another controversial one, I think. Third book in the Throne of Glass series, Heir of Fire. The first 2 books were great, were amazing. The first book was great. It was following this girl who was an assassin, and she ends up in this kingdom, gets put in this competition, and she has to become the assassin for this, I think, king. And so it's like really exciting. I'm like, oh my god, like what's gonna happen? So she does that, and then the second book, it's even more exciting. You know, more parts of the world are unveiled, and it was better than the first. I thought the second book was better than the first. I was so mind blown by so many things that were happening, and I was interested. But then as the third one, the Heir of Fire, hit, I was getting bored. You know, I don't know what it was, but I feel like at the beginning of the series, the problem was is it showed me, it tried to show me what the series was going to be like, but then it felt like a complete lie, because it wasn't about this girl who becomes this, like, it's not about this girl who is an assassin. It becomes something else, and I feel like in a lot of books that would have been fine. That's just part of, like, the plot growing. But for me, it just, like, I stopped caring as much, because also, like, the reveals feel like normal, you know? In books, like, that kind of stuff happens all the time, and it didn't blow my mind like it might have, or should have. So it was really disappointing for me. Next I have Couture and Lord Death. This is the one book in this list that isn't extremely popular. Couture and Lord Death I overhyped for myself. I was so excited about this book for some reason. I don't know if it was the synopsis or if it was the cover. I think it was a little bit of both. And at this point, I don't even remember what it's about. You know, I kind of feel bad because I can't really explain what it's about, but all I know is really disappointing. It wasn't well written. It didn't feel like how a normal book should feel. Like, it's not as good as like other books are. Like a typical normal book, like a 3-star book, it just wasn't even on that, like, standards, you know. It felt like definitely like someone's first attempt at a book. Not the first published book, but the first attempt at a book. I'm being so harsh, but it just wasn't that good, and I can't even remember the plot. It was not that memorable. Okay, the next book is Librarymoriam. This wasn't even that overhyped. It was kind of overhyped by one booktuber I watched, and because she loved it, I thought I would love it, and that's kind of like my mistake. But it's basically about this library in hell, and a character escapes a book to go find their author, and I think I lost interest because it didn't really focus on the library to hell. It focused on, like, the demons and, like, the gods and, like, the angels and all of that. I feel like it focused way more on that than it did on the aspects that interested me in the book, like people, like the characters being inside books and then them being able to escape. I thought that would have been really interesting to explore, and I thought that sounded so good, but it just ended up following a part of the story that I didn't really care about as much, and that's why it disappointed me. Then the last book I am disappointed by in this list is Cinnamon Ascends. This one, same thing. I was kind of overhyped for me by a booktuber, and I thought I would love it too, and I didn't. You know, the plot sounds so good. It's about this man who goes to this tower that has all of these different, like, societies in it on each level. But he loses his wife in it, so he's searching for his wife, and it just wasn't the type of book I liked. Like, the plot sounds really interesting, but actually reading it, you know, it's about him going on all these different, like, quests, and I don't really like quests in books. Like, you know, I love fantasy, but I don't like going on a quest, like, to I don't know. I don't want to give away spoilers, but he just kept going up this tower, and then, like, the issues just kept getting bigger and bigger, and he kept creating these issues, and then he almost cheats on his wife at one point, and I don't really like that. So I was really disappointed by him. Alright, so that is my list of the 10 most disappointing books I have read. I just realized while doing this video how controversial this is. I really bashed a lot of famous series, but now that I, like, did this, I kind of want to reread some of the books. Like, I kind of want to read A Court of Thorns and Roses again. Because I feel like if I read it a second time, maybe I would connect more to the people, because I think that the reason that most of these books was not for me is because I didn't connect with them, and that's completely a me problem, not a book problem, because I feel like none of these books were bad quality, the exception of one. I feel like all of them were good. They had good ideas behind them, and it was me that wasn't able to connect, and that's what disappoints me, is the fact that I wasn't able to connect to these books. So I think I'm going to reread Court of Thorns and Roses now. Because that sounds so, that plot was so good. That was such a good book. Just not the rest of the series. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you want me to do a part 2 of my most disappointing books. That one probably won't be as controversial, hopefully, and I might do that in the future. And next week, I think I'm planning on doing underrated books, so books that I love and didn't expect to. So I will see you next time. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and please like and subscribe. I post every single Thursday, and I'll see you next time. Bye.